Check that out. Some sweet peaches, hints of spicy ginger, just everything in perfect balance. This is a delicious beer. You need to check it out. Come along for the ride. Hey now, it's Brew Day, so this is the first step towards this ginger peach blonde experiment that I'm running here. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the water. Because I have relatively hard water where I live, I've decided to soften the water here. I'm actually going with the 50-50 blend of reverse osmosis water and just filtered water from my tap. The idea behind that is I want the slightly softer water, which should create a slightly softer sensation in the finished beer, which I think will pair really nicely with what I'm trying to achieve. Now, let's take a look at the grain. For the grist on this beer, I have adjusted my typical session blonde recipe. The base for this is just North American 2-row malt, and I'm going with 4% each of Vienna malt for hopefully just a little subtle toastiness. We're going with white wheat malt, which will hopefully add just a little bit of head retention and a little bit more of the softness to this beer. And then finally, a little bit of Crystal 15 malt, and that, again, these are all sort of subtle specialty malt characteristics I'm going for here. We'll give maybe just a little bit of caramel flavor to this, which again I think will pair nicely with the peaches and the ginger. So for that, I'm going to mill it up with my Monster Mill 3mm Pro. This bad boy is going to make short work of this grain. So I'm at my temperature here to dough in. Layer in all that beautifully milled grain. Get it stirred up here. We're going to be mashing at 149 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees Celsius. That should give us the sort of drier initial beer that I'm after here. I'm actually only going to be turning half of this batch into this ginger peach blonde. So my regular blonde that I get with the other half, I want to be exactly how I want it to be. And here we go. We're going to give that a 1 hour mash at that temp. Woohoo! She is murky here for the first little bit. After the 1 hour mash, I raised the temperature up to 75.5 degrees Celsius, or that 168 degrees Fahrenheit range, just to mash out. We're holding it here for 15 minutes, and then we're going to run off. And it looks like that wort cleared up quite a bit here, as all that starch converted to sugar. So now I'm just going to switch over the lids here on the brew stand so that I can fly sparge. Just firing those pumps up again. And we are collecting our first runnings here. I do have a full brew stand walkthrough video if you're interested in seeing exactly how this particular unit works. Now we've got some wort in that boil kettle. It's time to flame on. Now that we're above all of the pickups that are in the brew stand here, I'm going to add my first wort hops. So I'm going with Falconer's Flight, and I've got 36 grams of a 9.1% alpha hop here. And this is going to give us the entirety of our 20 IBUs for this particular beer. We're going with the Falconer's Flight 7 Seas blend here just because of all of those tropical, lightly floral, a little bit citrus sort of flavors that we'll get out of it, which should pair really nicely in this beer. We just hit our boil here. This is going to be a 60-minute boil, and there are no hops being added until flame out, so just time to wait. We're just hitting flame out here. I'm going to be adding 28 grams more of that Falconer's Flight just for a little bit of that hop aroma. Kill the flame, and then just get this all nicely stirred up to get a good cone in the bottom there to make running off easier. Get the lid on here and let it sit for probably a good 15 minutes before running off into the carboys. And now we're just running off through my plate chiller here into a couple of carboys. Well, I've got my carboys down here in the brewery. This one is actually quite a bit higher than the other one. This is going to be my just original standard blonde ale. I did leave room here in my second carboy so that I can add my peach and everything that I plan to a little bit here later on. Now at this point here, because I don't need to actually oxygenate this low of a gravity of wort, I'm just going to be rotating it like so and aerating it over approximately 1 minute per carboy. That's going to give me enough oxygen in solution for the yeast to do their thing and ferment. Reading below the meniscus, we come in at an original gravity of 1.040 on this beer. Well, we're now ready to pitch yeast here, so I've got some rehydrated US 05, and this was just using water that I pressure cooked along with my plate chiller. I'm just going to get all that yeast into here. Repeat with the second carboy. I pitched the yeast at 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and I've got these controllers set at 68, and that's where we're going to hold these beers for the majority of fermentation. The next morning, here we are. We've got this one just about at high krausen, just starting to peak. This other carboy is just a little bit further behind. I find that funny given the difference in volume here. Obviously this yeast was just getting to work a little bit quicker. But regardless, fermentation is on its way. After about 4 days there, primary fermentation is starting to wrap up on my carboy over here. It's time to get peachy. Now for that, I'm going to be using this peach nectar here. I use this in hot sauces and all kinds of things. Really like it as an ingredient. It's got great flavor. There's a lot of sweetness to it, which is going to be interesting to toss into this beer. Now, I don't want to just add it as is, because if I just dump that in right now, I'm worried about having a lot of extra pectin and things like that in the finished product, which will add to some haze that I'm trying to avoid. So I'm going to take this pectic enzyme here. I'm going to be dosing this filtered water that I boiled. I just got a stir bar in there because I'm going to sort of mix this up with my stir plate if I need to, just to kind of get it all nicely up into solution. It's going to be added to this here, and hopefully that's going to break down those pectins and just help result in a clearer finished product. So let's do it. Starting out here, I'm just going to star sand the heck out of this juice container here so that I'm not worried about any sort of sanitation issues. I've already got this water sterilized, so I'm just going to loosen that cap. And I'm going to star sand my countertop here just because this foil is going to be getting onto there, and I don't want to risk getting any sort of bacteria or anything like that onto the inside of that foil. I'm also using my Bunsen burner here that I use for a lot of my yeast oriented stuff here in the home brewery. That's going to create a nice updraft, so while I am working with this here, I don't have to worry about stuff sort of just descending, bacteria or anything that are on dust particles that might be floating around in the air, causing trouble inside this nectar. This pectic enzyme has a dosage rate of a half teaspoon per gallon. So because I'm working with, well, this is a 960 ml container here, I'm going to be going with probably just a heaping 1/8 teaspoon. Should be really good for that. The final 2 steps here are just sanitizing my hands and firing on a dust mask so that I don't breathe, or if I'm talking or whatever, I'm not going to get anything into any of these containers. Get that pectic enzyme into there. Nice. And there are still some little chunks here, so I'm going to just set this on my stir plate, and that'll get this mixed into solution really quickly. Now that's fully mixed in there, and we are just going to carefully get this into our peach container. And I managed to get just about all of that liquid in there, just the tiniest little bit left in that flask. That's excellent. And just going to swirl this around here. I'm going to let this sit overnight, and that should be long enough for this enzyme to work its magic on this small of a quantity of nectar. The next morning here, we are ready to add this peach nectar. So I've just got my funnel star sand here. I'm going to get this in. I'm adding this full bottle, and hopefully that will be enough to get our peach character where we want it. Give this a quick mix here and let it keep fermenting. All right, so a day and a half in here, I thieved a small sample, did a little taste test. There's definitely some peach in there, but it's a little more subtle than I want it to be if I'm going to be calling this a peach ale. So I'm going to be doubling the amount of peach nectar that I put in there. Similarly to what I did with the first amount of nectar, I added the pectic enzyme to this and let it sit overnight. And now we're dosing here with, again, that's the full jar, which is in that 960 milliliter range. In doing a quick Brix reading with my refractometer here, I got a reading of 11.8 on that peach nectar, which gives us a specific gravity of around 1048. I'm really only doing that just so I can calculate a final ABV on this beer. Reading below the meniscus, the forced attenuation test on the base blonde comes in at 1010. Now that fermentation is complete, I am pressure racking this ginger peach blonde into a corny keg. Then we're going to get it chilled down and gelatin-fined. You can check out all the processes for actually finishing off these beers in the brewing playlist on the channel. Reading below the meniscus, the finishing gravity on this ginger peach blonde comes in at right around 1008. And just stealing a little taste, I realized that this is very early in the actual finishing process for this beer, but I had to try it out. And it looks like we've got a definite peach character going on here. I'm not sure if I'm going to want a little bit more sweetness or a little bit more peach character going through it. That'll remain to be seen once we've gelatin-fined this and are ready sort of for our like ginger addition and the finishing steps here. Now this blonde ale has been gelatin-fined. I've got that in the keezer right now, and I'm ready to transfer into this sanitized carbonation and serving keg. However, I also need to ensure that we're not going to wind up kickstarting fermentation. The ginger addition that I'm going to be putting into this is a ginger syrup that I've made. Check out my video on that. I think it's delicious, but it does have sugar in it for sure, and I don't want to accidentally restart any kind of fermentation and cause issues like that. So we're going to add some potassium sorbate to this keg here. Now with this, it's typically a half teaspoon per gallon. We've got a 5-gallon keg, so I'm going to go 2.5 teaspoons of this into there. It's probably a little bit more than I need because we're not probably going to be adding actually a ton of sugar to this, but I just don't want to take any risks. I've also sanitized the top of this keg here with my Star San, and I'm going to add my 2.5 teaspoons here. Right now this is empty. It's sanitized, but empty. There's my 2.5. And now I'm just going to purge this with a little extra CO2, just so we don't have oxygen in there prior to transferring our beer in. And now we are ready to transfer. Again, I have a video on that pressure transferring process in the brewing playlist on the channel, so you can check all of those videos out there if you'd like. Now, the gelatin finding process should give us a couple of advantages here. First of all, we should have a clearer beer, for starters, and then secondly, a lot of that extra yeast that has dropped out of solution due to that process should help also prevent fermentation from trying to kick off. Between that and that potassium sorbate sort of preventing that any remaining yeast from being able to reproduce, we should be good. Now that this Peach Blonde Ale is in this keg here and we've got the potassium sorbate in there to prevent any sugar, hopefully, from doing anything, we're ready to gingerify it. We're going to do that with some of my homemade ginger syrup. Check out the video on that. It's fantastic syrup. I'm going to be adding some of this to this keg. Now I did actually, because I don't can this when I make it, I did run it through a pasteurization session with my precision cooker just to make sure it's pasteurized on the inside here, and we're going to be ready to go with that. So for pasteurizing there, I just put this in the hot water bath at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, gave it a couple hours there, and this will be pasteurized. Now I've Star San everything here, including this jar and also this metal sieve here, because I did notice that there were a couple of tiny little chunks inside this jar. I don't want that to get into this keg, but it's time to add some ginger. Proof that the sous vide pasteurization works. I'm going to start off with, I'm going to say, right around half of that jar. I don't want to over ginger this, so hopefully this is not over gingering it. Pop this lid back on, and just because now I have introduced a little bit of oxygen to the system here, I'm just going to purge this with some CO2 and then knock it on its side here and mix it up a little bit. So I did pour just a little bit of a sample here. I realize that this is certainly not finished because it's not carbonated. However, in tasting it, I can just barely get some of that ginger there, so I'm going to amp it up and add the rest of that jar. Now that full 4 ounces or 250 mils of that ginger syrup hit the ginger character exactly where I wanted it here, but I am noticing that the peach character is subdued after that fermentation. A lot of that sort of probably got blown off or just wasn't quite enough. So I've got myself another little container of this peach juice here that we're going to be adding. This is the next morning because I added some more of that pectinase to this just to hopefully potentially reduce some haze in the finished product. I'm going to open this up here and again, using my metal sieve, add some of this juice. Everything is all Star San here again. Just going to pour in. I'm aiming for roughly half of this container. And then similarly as to before, I'm just going to purge out any of that oxygen that's in there, mix it up and sample. After a quick sample there, I decided I do want to add the rest of this juice, so we will go ahead and do that. So that'll be another 960 mils of that peach juice. I do have some of just the unadulterated base blonde ale on tap here. That was half of the batch that I made. Let's just have a little sample. That is a gorgeous beer. Amazing. So that actually has everything that I was really going for with this particular recipe. This really does have everything that I was shooting for with the malts in this recipe. It's got that nice clean malt character coming out of that North American two-row. It's got just a little bit of toastiness coming out of the Vienna. There is just the barest hint of caramel coming out of that Crystal 15. It's got a decent amount of bitterness coming through here that makes it really drinkable, but I think is also going to play really nicely with the ginger peach version that I have. And of course, taking a peek at those hops, we are getting a little bit of the Falconer's Flight, some of that tropical, citrus, floral, all of those characters are coming through here from the first wort hopping, as that does, even though it's that early hop edition, it still does have some of that flavor transfer over. And just the tiniest bit of that in the aroma here as well. Okay, I can't wait for the ginger peach version. Well, after spiking that ginger peach blonde with more peach, the ginger syrup, carbonating and all that, we've got it on tap here. I've actually let it sit in here for about a week just because I knew that some of that peach was going to be settling out with that thick nectar, and there definitely was a couple of pints that I poured that were quite hazy, but we've cleared up here and it's time to officially taste. Not sure if you can hear my daughter's rock tumbler cranking away in the background. Oh, look at that. Definitely worth waiting. I'm really excited about this. Wow, there's so much immediate complexity going on in this beer. Right in the door, we've got that gentle, it's almost like a ripe peach flavor accompanied just perfectly with that ginger syrup. So we've got this ginger, this peach, the sweetness. It's not too sweet though, absolutely nowhere near cloying. And it finishes with some of that ginger spice, just a little bit of that ginger spice, and relatively dry. We've got a little bit of that toastiness coming out of the Vienna malt. For sure, some of that hop complexity with the Falconer's Flight and all the different characteristics that that brings to the table here. However, the peach and the ginger for sure are the stars of this ginger peach blonde. So absolutely nailed what I was going for there. Now, while this does have that sweetness and the ginger and the peach and all that going on here, it still remains quite a drinkable beer, which is awesome. I would say this is great for any time of the year, like especially right now. So another successful experiment. If you try it, please let me know how it turns out for you. Got to make some of that ginger syrup first if you don't have any of that on hand. But either way, till next time, keep your experiments and your homebrew at 11.